The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., piercing through the fever-induced haze that had become my world for the past 3 days. COVID had knocked me flat, leaving me quarantined in our guest bedroom, while Patricia and Emily slept safely down the hall. My temperature had spiked to 103 earlier, and every breath felt like swallowing razor blades. Sarah Mitchell's name glowed on my phone screen. My boss calling at this hour could only mean one thing. The servers were down again. After 12 years of being the go-to guy for every crisis, I'd grown accustomed to these midnight emergencies. "Rick Thompson," I croaked, my voice barely recognizable. "You're fired." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. No preamble, no explanation, just ice-cold finality. "Your projects and office space are reassigned. Clean out your desk remotely. Goodbye." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, wondering if the fever had finally made me delirious. "Did that really just happen?" I called back immediately. Sarah picked up on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "Okay," I said simply, my voice strangely calm despite the chaos in my head. "What do you mean, okay?" Her tone shifted, confusion replacing the cold authority. That's when I laughed, a deep, genuine belly laugh that echoed through the empty guest room and probably woke up half the neighborhood. The absurdity of it all, being fired while I was sick, the timing, the complete lack of humanity, it was almost comical. "Rick, what's so funny?" I wiped tears from my eyes. Whether from laughter or fever, I couldn't tell. "Sarah, those projects you just reassigned? The ones you're so confident about handing over to someone else? What about them?" "There's something you should probably know about the systems I built over the past 12 years. Something very important that nobody else knows." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like an eternity. "We'll discuss this when you're feeling better," she said, her voice now uncertain. "Yes," I replied, settling back into my pillow with a smile she couldn't see. "We certainly will." 3 months earlier, I'd been Richard Thompson, Senior Systems Architect at Nexus Technologies, for over a decade. While other guys my age were coaching Little League or taking weekend fishing trips, I was the guy who kept the lights on when everything went to hell. The company's entire infrastructure, every server, every security protocol, every line of critical code, had my fingerprints on it. Daddy missed another dinner. Emily had whispered to her stuffed elephant last Tuesday, not knowing I was listening from the hallway. At 8 years old, she'd already learned to set expectations low when it came to her father's availability. Patricia found me there, leaning against the wall like a defeated man. "She's not wrong, Rick. When's the last time you made it home before her bedtime?" I couldn't remember. That realization hit harder than any performance review ever could. "The Peterson project launches next month," I'd said, the same excuse I'd been using for years. "Once that's stable, things will calm down. That's what you said about the Morrison integration. And the Chen platform before that." Patricia's voice wasn't angry. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, it carried a tired sadness that cut deeper than any argument. "Emily drew a picture of our family yesterday. She drew you as a stick figure behind a computer screen. I'd promised myself that night that things would change after Peterson launched. I'd delegate more, take actual vacation days, be present for my family. All I needed was to get this one last project over the finish line. The Peterson project was my masterpiece, a proprietary customer management system that integrated with our security protocols in ways that would revolutionize how we handled client data. I'd spent 9 months designing every aspect of it, writing custom authentication algorithms that were so sophisticated they bordered on artistic. As a safety measure, something I'd learned from years of working with unreliable management, I'd built in a few insurance policies, backdoor access codes that only I knew, proprietary authentication sequences buried deep in the system architecture, and documentation that was deliberately incomplete. Not malicious, just careful. Better safe than sorry, I'd muttered to myself while writing the final authentication protocols. 12 years in corporate America had taught me that being indispensable wasn't about being the smartest guy in the room. It was about being the only guy who knew where all the bodies were buried. Little did I know how prophetic that decision would become. The first warning sign came during a routine Monday meeting in November. I'd presented the Peterson system's performance metrics. Customer satisfaction up 34%, processing time reduced by half, 0 security breaches in the first month of operation. Impressive work from the team, Sarah had said, her eyes focused on her laptop screen rather than on me. James, can you walk us through the technical specifications? James Morrison, a junior developer who'd been with the company for 8 months, stood up with a PowerPoint presentation that looked suspiciously familiar. As he clicked through slides that contained my diagrams, my code snippets, my architectural decisions, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The authentication algorithm was particularly challenging, James said, gesturing toward a flowchart I'd drawn at 3 a.m. 3 months earlier. But we managed to solve the integration issues through some creative problem solving. As if he'd been anywhere near the server room when I was debugging authentication failures for 72 straight hours. After the meeting, I'd approached Sarah privately. I think there might be some confusion about the Peterson project ownership. James presented work that Rick, I appreciate your contributions, she'd interrupted, not looking up from her phone. But we're trying to develop the junior staff. James showed real initiative on Peterson, and I want to make sure he gets proper recognition. Recognition for my work that James had observed from a distance while fetching coffee and taking notes. That evening, Patricia had been waiting for me with dinner still warm. For once, I'd made it home before Emily's bedtime, though my mood was darker than usual. How was work? She'd asked, the same question she'd asked every day for 12 years. Usually, I'd give her the standard answer. Good. Just the usual fires to put out. But that night, something in me cracked. They're giving away my work, I'd said quietly, cutting into my steak with more force than necessary. 12 years I've been building systems, solving problems, keeping that place running. And now they're handing out credit like party favors to kids who can barely spell algorithm. Patricia had reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Maybe it's time to start looking elsewhere. You're too talented to be treated like that. Dad? Emily had appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. Are you sad? I'd scooped her up, this perfect little human who still thought her father could fix anything. Just tired, sweetheart. But I'm better now that I'm home with my girls. That night, as I'd tucked Emily into bed, she'd ask the question that would haunt me for weeks. Daddy, do you like your job? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes adults get trapped in situations that slowly drain away their souls? That sometimes the thing you're good at becomes the thing that keeps you from the people you love most? I like building things that help people, I'd said finally, but sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices about work. Like when you choose work over my soccer games. The innocence of her question felt like a knife between my ribs. Yeah, sweetheart, like that. But I'd promised myself that after the next quarterly review, after the Peterson system was fully integrated, after the busy season ended, I'd find a better balance. There was always going to be an after. The second warning sign came in December, when I was excluded from the annual strategic planning meeting. For the first time in 6 years, my calendar remained conspicuously empty during the week when department heads gathered to plan the following year's initiatives. It's more of a high-level discussion this year. Sarah had explained when I'd asked about it. Less technical focus, more business strategy. You'd probably find it boring. Boring. The meeting where they'd decide the future of systems I'd designed, protocols I'd implemented, and infrastructure I'd maintained for over a decade. Apparently, my input wasn't needed for planning how to use the tools I'd built. That's when I started paying closer attention to the office dynamics I'd been too buried in code to notice. Whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. Meetings that happened behind closed doors. The way Sarah's assistant would suddenly become very busy with paperwork whenever I approached her desk. And then there was the email I wasn't supposed to see. It was a Friday afternoon in January, and I was troubleshooting a network issue that required access to Sarah's computer. She'd stepped out for a meeting, giving me her login credentials to fix the problem remotely. That's when I saw it. An email thread with the subject line, Operation Thompson Transition. My hands had frozen over the keyboard. Thompson. As in me. I shouldn't have opened it. Every ethical fiber in my body screamed against invading my boss's privacy. But seeing my own name in what was clearly a confidential discussion triggered something primal. The same instinct that makes you duck when someone throws something at your head. The email chain stretched back 4 months. 4 months of planning, strategizing, and preparing for my removal. They'd been discussing my transition out of the organization since October, just weeks after the Peterson system had launched successfully. Thompson's institutional knowledge makes him difficult to replace immediately. One email had read, suggest gradual transfer of responsibilities over 6-month period to minimize disruption. Another response, agreed. Morrison is eager to take on additional responsibilities. Can we accelerate his training? And then Sarah's reply, the one that made my blood run cold. Thompson's become too comfortable. His salary is eating into our budget flexibility. And frankly, his attitude about recognition has become problematic. Morrison is hungry, cheaper, and more collaborative. Let's move forward with the transition plan. Problematic attitude about recognition. Translation. I'd had the audacity to expect credit for my own work. I'd printed the emails, deleted them from the recently viewed folder, and finished fixing Sarah's network issue as if nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted inside me. The company I'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, and family time for was planning to dispose of me like outdated equipment. That night, I'd sat in my home office until 3 a.m., staring at printed emails and feeling like the biggest fool in corporate America. 12 years of loyalty, of being the reliable guy who fixed everything, of missing Emily's first steps because I was debugging servers, and this was my reward. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Not anger, exactly, but a cold, calculating clarity. If they wanted to play games, they'd pick the wrong person to underestimate. I'd spent the next 2 weeks quietly implementing my own transition plan. Not the one they were planning for me, but one that would ensure they'd remember my value long after I was gone. Every system I'd built over the years had layers of custom code, proprietary algorithms, and security protocols that existed nowhere in the official documentation. I'd been the sole architect, programmer, and maintainer of critical infrastructure components that kept Nexus Technologies running. What they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to learn during their 4 months of planning my disposal, was that removing me wouldn't just mean losing an employee. It would mean losing the institutional knowledge that held their entire operation together. As I sat there in the dark, listening to the sound of my family sleeping safely upstairs, I'd made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted Richard Thompson gone, they could have their wish. But they'd learn exactly what they were losing in the process. The phone call that would come 2 months later, the one that would find me sick with COVID and supposedly vulnerable, would be the moment they'd discover just how thoroughly they'd underestimated the quiet guy who'd been keeping their lights on for 12 years. But first, I had preparations to make. The morning after Sarah's midnight call, I woke up feeling human for the first time in days. My fever had broken sometime during the night, and the fog that had clouded my thinking was finally lifting. Patricia knocked softly on the guest room door, sliding a tray of soup and toast through the crack. "You were laughing in your sleep," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Are you feeling all right?" "Better than I have in months," I replied, and I meant it. There was something liberating about having the worst thing finally happen. The sword that had been hanging over my head for months had finally fallen, and surprisingly, I was still breathing. Emily's voice carried down the hallway. "Is Daddy not sick anymore?" "Almost better, sweetheart," I called back. "Just need one more day to make sure you don't catch my germs." What I really needed was one more day to watch the fireworks begin. I'd spent the previous evening, between fever spikes, activating what I privately called my insurance policy. Nothing malicious. I wasn't trying to destroy anyone's livelihood or tank the company's stock. But I'd designed their systems with built-in dependencies that only I fully understood. And now they were about to discover what happens when you fire the architect without reading the blueprints. My phone started buzzing at 7:23 a.m. James Morrison, my supposed replacement, calling with what I imagine was barely contained panic. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came at 7:31, then another at 7:45. By 8 a.m., my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree. James, Sarah, the IT director, even the head of client services. I listened to exactly none of them. Instead, I made myself a proper cup of coffee for the first time in weeks and settled in to watch the digital equivalent of a controlled demolition. You see, when you build a house of cards over 12 years, you learn exactly which cards are load-bearing. The Peterson Customer Management System wasn't just a standalone application. It was integrated with 17 other systems, each connection secured by custom authentication protocols that I'd written myself. Remove the architect, and the whole structure starts to sway. I'd designed it that way on purpose, not as sabotage, but as job security. Every good engineer builds systems that are difficult to replace them quickly. The difference was, I'd built systems that were impossible to replace me at all. The authentication tokens that allowed different systems to communicate rotated every 72 hours, generated by algorithms that existed only in my head and in encrypted files that would take a cryptography expert months to crack. The backup systems had backups, but they were all secured with the same proprietary methods. I'd given them the keys to the car, but I'd designed the engine myself and the manual was written in a language only I spoke fluently. By noon, my voicemail box was full. The text messages were becoming increasingly desperate. Rick, we need to talk urgently about system access. Sarah, dude, nothing is working. The Peterson authentication is failing across all platforms. James, Mr. Thompson, please call as soon as possible. We have multiple client-facing systems down. IT Director. The beauty of it was the gradual escalation. It wasn't a sudden catastrophic failure that would trigger emergency protocols. Instead, it was a slow strangulation. Systems that worked fine individually but couldn't communicate with each other. Authentication failures that compounded throughout the day, and error messages that provided just enough information to be frustrating but not enough to be useful. Patricia brought me lunch around 1 p.m., eyeing my phone suspiciously as it continued to buzz and chirp. They really need you, don't they? She said, settling into the chair beside my bed. Apparently so, I replied, taking a spoonful of her homemade chicken soup. Funny how that works. Are you going to help them? I considered the question seriously. The old Rick, the people pleaser who'd sacrificed everything for company loyalty, would already be on his laptop fixing problems remotely. But something had fundamentally shifted during that midnight phone call. Not yet, I said finally. I think they need to understand exactly what they're asking for. By 3 p.m., the situation had escalated beyond individual system failures. Client calls were coming in, major accounts reporting that they couldn't access their data, process orders, or communicate with their dedicated account managers. The Peterson system wasn't just failing, it was taking other critical infrastructure down with it. Sarah called my cell phone directly at 3:47 p.m. This time, I answered. Rick, thank God. We need you to walk James through the authentication protocols. He can't access any of the integrated systems. I'm sorry, Sarah, but I'm no longer an employee of Nexus Technologies, I said, my voice professionally polite. Per your instructions last night, my projects have been reassigned. I'm sure James has everything he needs. Rick, this isn't the time for games. We have clients calling, systems down across multiple departments. You need to help us fix this. I'm confused, I replied, genuinely enjoying the irony. Are you offering me my job back? Because just 12 hours ago, you were very clear about my employment status. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. We need to discuss the terms of your departure more thoroughly, she said finally. Terms? I laughed. The same deep belly laugh from the night before. Sarah, you fired me in the middle of the night while I was sick with COVID. You told me my projects were reassigned and to clean out my desk. Those seem like pretty definitive terms to me. Rick, be reasonable. You know how these systems work. Just give us the access codes and authentication sequences, and we can discuss compensation for your consulting time. Oh, I'm being very reasonable, I said. I'm following your instructions exactly. You reassign my projects to other people. I'm sure they'll figure it out. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete control over my own professional destiny. For 12 years, I'd been reactive, fixing their problems, meeting their deadlines, accommodating their demands. Now, for the first time, they needed something from me more than I needed something from them. The next morning brought a different kind of communication. Instead of panicked phone calls, I received a formal email from Nexus Technologies' legal department. Mr. Thompson, it began, you are in violation of your employment contract, specifically the sections regarding intellectual property and cooperation with company operations. Failure to provide necessary system access information may result in legal action for breach of contract and corporate sabotage. I read the email twice, then called my lawyer, not the company's lawyer, but an employment attorney I'd consulted 6 months earlier when I'd first started sensing political shifts in the office. David, it's Rick Thompson. Remember we talked about wrongful termination and intellectual property rights? I think it's time to have that conversation. You see, David Martinez had been practicing employment law for 15 years, and he'd seen cases like mine before. They fired you, and now they're threatening you for not helping them. Rick, do you have documentation of the termination? Recorded phone call, timestamp, witnesses to my quarantine status, plus some interesting emails I discovered about their planning process. Forward me everything. Don't respond to their legal threats. Don't provide any technical assistance, and document every communication. This is about to get very interesting. By Thursday, the ripple effects were expanding beyond technical failures. Stock analysts had noticed unusual trading volume in Nexus Technologies shares. Client complaints were escalating to senior executives. Industry blogs were starting to pick up rumors about infrastructure instability at one of the region's most reliable technology companies. The Peterson system wasn't just a customer management platform. It was the nervous system that connected sales, billing, customer service, and delivery tracking. When it failed, the company didn't just lose functionality, it lost credibility. I spent Thursday morning with Emily, helping her with a school project about simple machines. We built a lever using a ruler and a pencil, demonstrating how a small force applied at the right point could move much larger objects. Daddy, is this like your work? She asked, balancing a stack of books with a small weight on the other end. Very much like my work, sweetheart. Sometimes the smallest piece is the most important one. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unfamiliar. Mr. Thompson? This is Margaret Chen, CEO of Nexus Technologies. I believe we need to have a conversation. Margaret Chen had been appointed CEO 18 months earlier, brought in from outside to modernize operations and improve efficiency. I'd met her exactly twice, once at the company holiday party and once during a brief hallway introduction. She knew my name, but she certainly didn't know my value to daily operations. Ms. Chen, I replied carefully, what can I do for you? I think the question is what we can do for each other. I understand there's been some miscommunication about your employment status, and I'd like to resolve the situation quickly and professionally. Miscommunication. That was an interesting way to describe being fired via midnight phone call. I wasn't aware there was any confusion, I said. Sarah Mitchell was quite clear about my termination. Yes, about that. I've reviewed the circumstances of your departure, and I believe mistakes were made. Poor timing, poor communication, poor judgment all around. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to return to your position with additional compensation and a formal apology. For a moment, I felt the old instincts kick in. The people-pleasing, conflict-avoiding tendencies that had shaped my career for over a decade. The offer was tempting, and the vindication felt good. But then I thought about Emily's drawing. the one where I was just a stick figure behind a computer screen. I thought about all the birthday parties, soccer games, and bedtime stories I'd missed. I thought about the 4 months they'd spent planning my disposal while I worked 70-hour weeks to make their systems successful. That's a generous offer, Ms. Chen. But I'm curious. What changed your mind about my value to the organization? The pause told me everything I needed to know. Your expertise has proven more integral to our operations than some people realized. Some people, meaning your management team, meaning we made an error in judgment that we'd like to correct. I looked out the window where Patricia was pushing Emily on the swing set we'd bought 2 years ago, but I'd never had time to properly enjoy. Emily was laughing, her hair flying in the wind, completely oblivious to the corporate drama that was reshaping our family's future. Ms. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to decline. Mr. Thompson, perhaps we should discuss compensation. I'm authorized to offer a significant increase in salary, additional vacation time, stock options. It's not about money, I interrupted. Though I noticed nobody mentioned money when they were planning my termination. Another long pause. What would it take for you to reconsider? That was the moment I realized I held all the cards. Not just technically, but psychologically. They needed me more than I needed them. And that shifted the entire balance of power. Honestly, nothing. I've already accepted a position with Meridian Systems. They offered me a 40% salary increase, full remote work flexibility, and equity participation. But more importantly, they offered me respect. It wasn't entirely true. I'd had preliminary conversations with Meridian, but nothing formal yet. However, the psychological impact was immediate. Rick, please don't make any hasty decisions. Let's meet in person to discuss this properly. I'll tell you what, Ms. Chen. I'll provide transition assistance to help minimize disruption to your clients and employees. Not because I owe the company anything, but because there are good people there who don't deserve to suffer for management's poor decisions. That's very professional of you. I'll work with your technical team to document the systems properly and create a transition plan. But I won't be returning as an employee, and I won't be working for free. My consulting rate is $300 per hour with a minimum 40-hour engagement. $12,000 to fix problems that could have been avoided if they'd treated their senior architect with basic professional respect. That seems reasonable under the circumstances. After I hung up, Patricia found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone with a mixture of amazement and exhaustion. "How do you feel?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Like I just woke up from a 12-year dream," I said. "Or maybe nightmare. I'm not sure which. Emily wants to know if you can help her with homework tonight." "Tell her I'd love to. And Patricia, I'm going to be around a lot more from now on. I hope that's okay." She kissed my forehead, the same way she used to when we were newlyweds, and the future felt full of infinite possibilities. It's more than okay, Rick. It's perfect. The next day, I drove to Nexus Technologies for what I knew would be the last time as someone with access to the building. The transition meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving me time to prepare documentation and create a proper handover plan. But first, I had one more stop to make. Emily's school was hosting a science fair, and for the first time in 3 years, I was going to be there. Her project about simple machines had evolved into a complex demonstration of mechanical advantage, and she was bursting with excitement to show it off. "Daddy, you came!" she squealed when she saw me walking into the gymnasium. "I promised I would, didn't I? But you've never been able to come before." "Well, things are different now, sweetheart. Daddy has a new job that lets him be here for the important stuff." As we walked through her display, explaining how pulleys and levers could multiply force, I realized she'd inadvertently created the perfect metaphor for my situation. Sometimes the smallest change in position can move mountains. Later that afternoon, I sat in a Nexus Technologies conference room across from Margaret Chen, Sarah Mitchell, James Morrison, and a lawyer whose primary job seemed to be looking stern and taking notes. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. 4 people in expensive suits trying to maintain authority they'd already lost, facing one guy in jeans and a polo shirt who held their entire operation in his hands. "We appreciate you coming in, Rick," Margaret began. "I understand you've prepared transition documentation?" "I have," I replied, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Complete system architecture documentation, authentication protocols, integration guides, and troubleshooting procedures. Everything your team will need to maintain operations." Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "And the access codes, the authentication sequences for the Peterson integration?" "Also included," I said, "along with instructions for implementing your own security protocols going forward. You'll want to change everything immediately, of course. Standard security practice when an employee leaves." The relief in the room was palpable. They'd been expecting continued resistance, more leverage plays, extended negotiations. Instead, I was handing them exactly what they needed to function without me. "This is very comprehensive," Margaret said, flipping through the documentation. "Thank you for being so thorough." "There's one more thing," I added, pulling out a second folder. "These are copies of communications I discovered regarding the planning of my termination. 4 months of emails discussing budget concerns, replacement strategies, and opinions about my problematic attitude regarding recognition for my work." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Rick, I'm not sure what you're implying," Sarah started. "I'm not implying anything," I cut her off. "I'm stating clearly that I have documentation of a deliberate plan to terminate my employment while systematically transferring my responsibilities and credit for my work to a junior employee. This occurred over a period of months, during which I continued to work in good faith, believing my job was secure." The lawyer stopped taking notes and started paying very close attention. "What do you want?" Margaret asked quietly. "Nothing from you," I replied. "But I want other employees to know that their contributions matter, that loyalty should be reciprocated, and that good people shouldn't have to worry about being disposed of for budget convenience." I stood up, leaving both folders on the table. "My consulting work here is complete. The systems are documented, the transition path is clear, and your technical team should be able to maintain operations without difficulty. I wish you all the best." As I walked toward the door, Sarah called after me. "Rick, wait, I want you to know. What happened wasn't personal. It was just business." I turned back to face her, remembering all the midnight phone calls, the missed family dinners, the years of putting company needs ahead of my own health and happiness. "Sarah, that's exactly the problem. For 12 years, I made it personal. I cared about this place, about the work, about the people. I made your business my personal mission." I paused, looking around the conference room one last time. The sad thing is, you had someone who would have walked through fire for this company. Instead, you got someone who was just doing a job. The difference between those two people is everything. 6 months later, I was working from a home office that actually felt like home, consulting for 3 different companies that valued expertise over politics. Emily's soccer team had made it to regional championships, and I'd been there for every game. Patricia and I had taken our first real vacation in 5 years. The final irony came in a phone call from Margaret Chen on a Tuesday evening. Nexus Technologies was struggling with a new integration project, and they wanted to hire me as a consultant. "We'll pay whatever your rate is," she said. "We just need someone who understands complex system architecture." "I appreciate the call, Margaret, but I'm booked solid for the next 6 months. You might want to try reaching out to some of the senior architects at other firms. I hear there are a lot of talented people looking for companies that know how to value their expertise." After I hung up, Emily climbed into my lap with a book about inventions. "Daddy, can we read about the guy who invented the lever?" "Absolutely, sweetheart. Did you know that Archimedes once said, if you give him a long enough lever and a place to stand, he could move the world?" "Is that like what you did with your old job?" "Sometimes 8-year-olds see things more clearly than adults ever do." "Yeah, it's exactly like that." As we read together in the soft light of my home office, I realized that losing everything I thought I wanted had given me everything I actually needed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away and build something better. The phone rang again, but this time I let it go to voicemail. Whatever crisis was happening in someone else's corporate world, it would have to wait. I had more important things to do